Howdy, Immortalium here. Today we're going to be discussing Osamu Tezuka's The Book of Human Insects. First of all, what are my opinions on it? I liked it, although considering the high standards of Osamu Tezuka's work, I must admit it wasn't quite reached by this. First of all, the story. Basically in the story we follow a woman called Toshiko Tomura, and she has an ability, and the ability is that she spends a bit of time with anyone and she'll be able to do, anything they're good at and better. So, that's an incredible ability. She basically ruins tons of people's lives by plagiarism and stealing stuff and all that jazz. Originally published, I think in the early 70s, 70 to 71. From what I read before about Osamu Tezuka, that would have been about the time in which he had to deal with the Gekiga movement, which was a group of manga artists, or mangaka, who they rejected basically Osamu Tezuka's cartoony looking style, like with Astro Boy and Dororo and Princess Knight and all that jazz, and aimed for more realistic, more adult stories. And of course Tezuka reacted by making his art look more realistic and increasing the adult content in his stories, which he liked actually, because I remember that hearing that it allowed him to be able to deal with themes he was unable to do so in the past. But having read this, I can tell that he's still trying to get used to the introducing adult themes. There's some adult ideas in here that, to be honest, they come out a bit sloppy. Toshiko Tomura, for instance, she's a good character overall, but there's a particular adult component of her. It probably isn't too much of a spoiler. It seems to come in, I think, about page 30 or something like that. Yeah, it's about page 30, so I'll just spoil it anyway. Basically, she has a wax model of her mother, and she comes back home every so often, despite being a massive celebrity, and she actually takes the wax breast of her mother and starts sucking on it like a baby. At this point, she also strips off all her clothes and all that jazz. And I thought, to me, it felt unnecessary, unlike a lot of the other kind of nudity and sexual stuff in other works like Ayako and Mu and all that. This one felt, like it could have benefited the story not to have that in there. I guess it kind of shows how disturbing she is, but she's plenty disturbing by the fact that she can destroy people's lives and take, their life's work and just remove it from them. And already she's a pretty messed up character. You don't need to have her sucking on a wax breast in order to make her seem disturbing. Basically, there's only 4 chapters in this whole book. This is about the equivalent of 2 manga volumes. So that's about 360 pages. Almost exactly 360 pages, only a little more. And basically, in each story, we kind of get to see, how she reacts with people, how people interact with her. And all that jazz. So it's definitely not a light read. It's quite intense at points, and it's interesting to see how she reacts to certain people. I mean, there's a certain guy in the middle of the story in which there's a kind of there's a fantastic interaction between her and him. Try not to spoil it, but basically he's this rich guy, and she has to deal with him, and it's a fascinating kind of to watch her play off him and him off her. So I really did like that, and I must admit, okay, the first chapter didn't do much for me, but the rest of the book did. So even if you read the first chapter and don't like it, keep reading, and it'll work eventually. That's the way it worked with me. Artistically, while the work is more realistic than, like Astro Boy, Dororo, Princess Knight, etc., etc., it's still not as detailed as, say, Ayako or Mu or any of those. So, but it has an appealing art style. Lots of nice detail, fantastic composition. Like, one thing I always love about Osamu Tezuka is the way he organizes his panels is just superb. So that's definitely worth looking at. And he has some very funky looking art sometimes. Like, in particular, take a look at this. Like, I find that really kind of really weird. Although if you want a more kind of what the book overall looks like, mainly, it's kind of about more like this art style. But you get some kind of funky metaphors and all that jazz, which, you know, I always love those visual metaphors. And one other thing that I found kind of annoying about this was the fact that, okay, I can get what Osamu Tezuka's aim was. It basically, the whole point of the story is that it's kind of just a simple period of our time, of our life. So there's no real kind of conclusion. There is a bit of a conclusion, but it isn't so much so. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to take this point here and this point here of our life and just kind of show it to you, and then we're going to leave it at that. And I can understand why he'd do that. Like, you know, stories don't always, you know, supposed to, you know, they don't need to always have a conclusion. So I can understand that. But still, I felt that it didn't conclude enough. I was hoping for a bit more conclusion, but I can see his point. I can see his point. So yeah, paper quality wise, it's very good. It's a little bigger than your standard tankobon. Published by Vertical. Here you go. So as you can see, it's actually much wider than the normal volume, and only just slightly taller. There's a hardcover version of this, but it's probably going to be out of print soon. And plus the paperback's cheaper, and the paper quality is excellent anyway, so that's good. So overall, I thought it was good, but it failed to live up to my expectations of Osamu Tezuka's other work. Now I can understand why. He was still getting used to the whole adult thing, and all that jazz, and he had a few ideas, and I can see where he's coming from. I just think it could have worked a little better. So yeah, if I had to give this a score, it would probably actually be just a 3 out of 4, which for Tezuka is low, but you know, what can you do? I mean, you know, overall I'd still recommend this. Just, you know, if I wouldn't recommend this to be one of your first mangas, you know, from Tezuka. If I was to recommend something, I'd go more with Ayako, Message Adolf, maybe Blackjack, one of those. And then this would be more for the, if you're interested more in Tezuka's more lesser known works, and if you want more kind of experimental manga, because one thing I can say about this is it is quite experimental. There's lots of fascinating techniques used in this, and for that I do recommend it. But don't go in expecting as much as his other works. That's all I can say. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and bye bye.